All right, let's pull back the curtain on history tonight. But be warned, we're not heading to the parts you see in the movies. Forget the sweeping shots of majestic castles, the knights in shining, polished armor, and the damsels with their perfectly clean, flowing hair. We're going somewhere much, much darker. We're journeying to a time of relentless plagues, imaginative punishments, and a lumpy brownish stew called pottage that was less of a meal and more of a threat. Tonight, we are diving headfirst into the cold, muddy, and unflinchingly brutal reality of what daily life was actually like during the Middle Ages. That romanticized version of history that Hollywood and fantasy novels have so carefully crafted and sold to us, we're going to set it on fire. The truth is, with our modern sensibilities, our reliance on comfort, and our quaint expectation of not dying from a splinter, most of us probably wouldn't last a single solitary day. It's a world that would chew you up and spit you out before the sun even reached its peak. So, before you settle in for this little trip back in time, go ahead and do the things that help this channel grow. Take a moment to like the video, and if you genuinely enjoy peeling back the layers of the past to see the grim reality underneath, consider subscribing. I'd also love to know where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is for you right now. It is genuinely fascinating to see this community of history lovers assembling from every corner of the globe, ready to stare into the abyss together. Now, for the full experience, go ahead and dim the lights. If you have a fan, maybe turn it on for that soft, ambient hum in the background. Let's shut out the 21st century for a little while and ease into tonight's journey. Let the noise of the modern world fade, and let's step together into the oppressive silence and filth of the past. Congratulations, you've just woken up. The year is 1325. The first piece of good news is that you are, against considerable odds, alive. The bad news? So are the fleas, and the lice, and the mites, and a whole ecosystem of tiny, blood-sucking companions that consider you their personal walking buffet. Your bed isn't a bed in any sense you would recognize. It's a half-rotten straw mattress, a lumpy pile of hay and dried grasses stuffed into a coarse burlap sack. It smells like the floor of a barn after a rainstorm because, up until about 3 months ago, it probably was the floor of a barn. There is no memory foam here, there are no ergonomic pillows, and you can forget completely about high thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. Your only comfort against the biting cold is a single wool blanket. This blanket hasn't been properly washed since last winter, if ever. Over the months, it has absorbed sweat, dirt, rain, and the general grime of daily life, making it so stiff and heavy that it feels less like a piece of bedding and more like a small sleeping farm animal draped over your body. You try to remember a time when it didn't smell like damp sheep and regret, but you can't. You blink your eyes open, not to the gentle glow of a smartphone or the soft beeping of an alarm, but to the violent, clanging toll of a church bell in the distance. This is the medieval version of a wake-up call, and it's a technology that has somehow managed to be both louder and significantly less merciful than any modern alarm. It's not a suggestion to get up, it's a command, a stark reminder that your time does not belong to you. It belongs to the Lord of the Manor, and it belongs to God. Your home, if you can call it that, is a single-room wooden hut. The walls are a rickety creation of wattle and daub, a lattice of woven sticks packed with a mixture of wet soil, clay, sand, and straw. It's less like a wall and more like a solid-form basket that's slowly crumbling back into the earth. There are no windows, just small openings covered with cloth or wooden shutters that do very little to keep out the cold, the rain, or the wind. The floor plan is what a modern real estate agent might charitably call charming and open concept. In reality, this means your entire family, Your parents, your siblings, your spouse, your children, and maybe a random cousin who showed up one day and simply never left, all share this one cramped space. But you're not just sharing it with your human relatives, you also share it with the livestock. The family goat, a few chickens, and perhaps even a pig are all huddled in a corner, adding their own unique contributions to the atmosphere. And oh, the smell. It's a fragrant, layered symphony of odors that would make a modern nose cry for mercy. There's the bass note of stale spilled beer and human sweat, layered with the sharp, earthy tang of goat manure, the damp funk of the thatched roof, and something else. A musty, creeping scent you desperately pray isn't mold, but which you know, deep in your soul, absolutely is. Scented candles haven't been invented yet, and even if they had been, they would just melt into a sad puddle on your perpetually damp dirt floor. You try to stretch your limbs to welcome the day, but you immediately regret the decision. The air is freezing, a damp cold that clings to your skin and sinks into your bones. Every joint you own seems to ache with a deep, weary pain. You are only 22 years old, but in medieval terms, you're basically middle-aged. Your spine cracks and groans like the hinge of an old wooden door. Your knees pop and grind with the sound of a leather bag full of rocks being shaken by a very confused and very tired peasant. Getting out of bed is a high-stakes gamble. The dirt floor beneath you is either slick and muddy from last night's rain, which has inevitably leaked through the thatched roof, or it's crusty and sharp from something your neighbor's chicken wandered in and did while you were sleeping. Either way, the moment your bare feet touch the ground, they become a part of the hut's thriving microscopic ecosystem. And privacy? What on earth is that? The concept doesn't exist. Your entire family, plus that lingering cousin, are all waking up, coughing, and stirring just inches away from you. There are no bedrooms, there are no curtains, there is no me time, there is only communal living, communal sleeping, and communal suffering. Welcome to your morning in medieval Europe, a world where you are never, ever truly alone, because an assortment of parasites, a few rodents, and at least 8 other people are always there with you, sharing your air, your food, and your fleas. And this, believe it or not, is just how your day starts. From here, it only gets worse.
You've managed to untangle yourself from the suffocating embrace of your wool blanket and crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Your joints are screening, the cold is already sunk deep into your marrow, and you're covered in a fine layer of dirt and flea bites. Congratulations on achieving the first victory of the day, becoming vertical. But there's no time to celebrate, because another, far more urgent matter is making itself known. Nature calls. And in the 14th century, nature doesn't call politely. It doesn't send a gentle text message. It screams at you with the force of a divine mandate, a biological imperative that drowns out all other thoughts. This is the moment your 21st century mind truly begins to fracture, the point where you start to desperately, profoundly miss the simple, sterile magic of a modern bathroom. Let's be perfectly clear about what you're facing. There is no toilet. There is no heated seat. There is no beautifully embossed triple-plied toilet paper waiting on a convenient roll. There is no flush, no sanitary system, not even a mildly resentful plunger tucked away in the corner for emergencies. Here, in the glorious year 1325, the simple act of relieving yourself is a logistical nightmare, a high-risk social experiment, and very often a small-scale public event. If you're a peasant, which statistically you almost certainly are, your designated bathroom is a wooden bucket located somewhere behind the house. And when I say a wooden bucket, I mean the wooden bucket. It's a communal piece of family furniture, and it's already nearly full because your Uncle Wolfstan, a man whose diet consists primarily of turnips and regret, had a particularly rough night. The smell rising from it is of biblical proportions. It's an aroma so potent, so deeply offensive to the very concept of breathable air that it feels like a physical assault. You hold your breath until your lungs burn, do your business as quickly as humanly possible, and then comes the real kicker. You have to empty it. And where do you empty it? Into the street. Yes, the street. The narrow, muddy lane running between the hovels is the designated disposal area for every household's accumulated waste. Of course, there's a sliver of etiquette involved. You're supposed to lean out of your doorway, or a small window if you have one, and bellow the famous warning, "Gardez-vous." This phrase, a bastardization of the Old French "Gardez-vous," literally means "watch out for the water." It's a polite heads up to any poor soul unlucky enough to be walking by at that exact moment. Though frankly, given the state of the roads and the lack of warning, no one ever moves fast enough. The streets of any medieval town are, in essence, open sewers. They are charming, viscous rivers of human waste, animal droppings, rotting food scraps, and 1,000 other mystery liquids you'd be wise to not examine too closely. It's a system that works in the sense that it moves the problem from inside your house to directly outside your house. Now, let's say you're slightly more fortunate. Perhaps you live in a larger, more organized town that boasts public latrines. Congratulations on this supposed upgrade in your quality of life. You now have the privilege of sitting shoulder to shoulder with a dozen complete strangers on a long, splintery wooden plank riddled with holes. This structure is typically built over a running river or a deep, dark pit, and the concepts of privacy and ventilation are treated as cruel, elaborate jokes. You might even find yourself making small talk with the person next to you, discussing the weather or the price of barley, all while trying your absolute best not to breathe too deeply lest the fumes render you unconscious. It is a deeply communal experience, a social gathering point that just happens to be centered around a shared cesspit. And what about toilet paper? Never heard of it. That's a luxury from a far-off future you couldn't possibly imagine. Your options for personal hygiene are all provided by Mother Nature, and none of them are good. Most people make do with a handful of straw, a clump of leaves, a bit of moss scraped from a damp wall, or if they're feeling particularly indulgent, a scrap of rough, scratchy wool. And sometimes when none of those are available, the answer is simply nothing at all. This might go a long way towards explaining why the firm, friendly handshake had yet to become a popular greeting. But surely you think it must be better if you're a noble, if you live in a castle. There must be some improvement, right? Well, sort of. You might have access to a garderobe. This is essentially a small stone closet built into the castle's thick outer wall with a hole in the floor that drops your waste directly down the side of the building and into the moat below. It's a brilliant idea in theory, offering a modicum of privacy and a direct disposal route. Except your enemies know this. Attackers and assassins were famously aware of this architectural feature, and yes, there are historical accounts of sieges where invaders would attempt to climb up the accumulated waste chute to gain entry into the castle. It's a whole new meaning of entering through the back door, and it adds a thrilling element of mortal peril to your daily routine. So, whether you are a humble farmer or a powerful baron, medieval toileting is a daily ritual of humiliation. It's cold, it's depressingly public, it can be unexpectedly dangerous, and it is never, ever not disgusting. One wrong step on a slick, wet cobblestone, and you could find yourself face first in the collected leftovers of your entire community. You've now survived the first major trial of the morning. And you still haven't even brushed your teeth. Don't worry, we'll get to that horror next.
You've successfully navigated the treacherous morning gauntlet. You've survived the flea-infested bed, and you've managed to dispose of last night's biological waste without becoming a victim of someone else's. You deserve a reward for your efforts, don't you? Perhaps a nice breakfast, something warm, something delicious, something comforting to steel you against the day ahead. You can almost picture it. A plate of sizzling bacon, some fluffy scrambled eggs, maybe a warm pastry, and a steaming cup of freshly brewed coffee. Hold that thought. Now take it, crumple it up, and throw it into the smoldering embers of the fire, because you live in medieval Europe, and nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you're charitable enough to call it that, is a grim, joyless affair. There are no eggs Benedict, there are no coffee machines sputtering cheerfully to life, there is most certainly no avocado toast. You squat on a low stool near the fire, the only source of warmth in your drafty hut, and stare down into a rough-hewn wooden bowl filled with something that looks like it was recently scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage isn't a dish so much as it is a state of being. It is a thick, gloopy, formidable stew made from whatever grains, roots, and scraps your family could get its hands on. Think of it as a perpetual stew. It simmers away in a large iron cauldron that hangs over the fire day and night. This pot is never fully emptied. It's a living, edible experiment. When the contents get low, new ingredients are simply dumped on top of the old ones. Yesterday's leftovers become today's base, which will in turn become the foundation for tomorrow's meal. This process can go on for days, sometimes even weeks. The flavor profile is complex. It carries the ghosts of every meal for the past month. The ingredients are a who's who of medieval peasant life. The base is usually a coarse grain like barley, oats, or rye. Then come the vegetables, typically whatever is hardiest and cheapest: turnips, parsnips, a few onions, maybe some wilted cabbage leaves. If you're lucky, a handful of beans or peas might make their way into the mix, adding a burst of excitement. The texture is a lumpy, sullen sludge, and its color is a profoundly uninspiring shade of brownish gray. It's the kind of meal that doesn't just fill your stomach, it weighs down your soul. Served on the side is a hunk of bread so dense and so hard that it could probably be used to fend off a minor sword attack. This isn't the light, airy sourdough of your modern dreams. This is a formidable loaf made from coarse rye flour or barley, because wheat is a rich man's fantasy, a food for lords and bishops. To make the precious flour go further, the bread is often bulked up with fillers: sawdust, ground up acorns, dried peas, or even a bit of clay. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it with ease. You engage in a lengthy and often violent negotiation with it, hacking off a piece with a dull knife. And what are you drinking with this feast? You're not sipping on fresh orange juice or a fancy oat milk latte. At 6 o'clock in the morning, you're drinking beer. Yes, beer. Your entire family, including the children, is starting the day with a mug of weak, watery ale. This isn't for recreation, it's a matter of survival. The local water source, be it a river, stream, or well, is a teeming cesspool of parasites, animal waste, and every conceivable type of bacteria known to man. Drinking it straight is a game of Russian roulette with your digestive system. But the brewing process involves boiling the water, which kills off the most dangerous microbes. So you start your day with small beer, an ale with a very low alcohol content, high enough to be safe, but low enough that you can still operate a plow without falling over. No one is particularly happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Do you want some meat or cheese to go with your meal? Keep dreaming. Those are luxury items, reserved for major holidays like Christmas or Easter, and even then, only if your local lord is feeling particularly generous after a good harvest. Most peasants wouldn't see meat on their table more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, that's a fleeting pleasure available only when it's in season, and most of it is quickly fermented into wine or cider before it has a chance to rot. And don't you even dare to think about spices. A pinch of black pepper, imported at immense cost along treacherous trade routes, is worth more than your monthly wages. Salt, the most basic seasoning, is so valuable as a preservative that it's often kept under lock and key by the wealthy. So your meal is bland, a taste that can only be described as wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. You chew your gritty, tooth-threatening bread, soaking it in the pottage to make it soft enough to swallow. You gulp down your lukewarm medieval beer and try not to think too hard about the rat that may have taken a few curious nibbles from your simmering cauldron during the night. Breakfast in the Middle Ages doesn't energize you, it doesn't delight you, it just happens to you. It's a heavy, functional lump of calories designed to give you just enough fuel to get through the morning. And now that you're properly underfed and vaguely hydrated, it's time to go to work. A long, grueling day of labor that your life absolutely depends on.
So, you've choked down your sad medieval breakfast, a meal designed less for enjoyment and more for sheer ballast. The heavy, gritty bread and lumpy pottage sit in your stomach like a stone, a crude fuel for the brutal day of labor that lies ahead. Now, it's time to get dressed. Though the term get dressed implies a choice, a selection from a wardrobe, which is a concept so laughably futuristic it might as well be witchcraft. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. It's a rough, scratchy tunic made of heavy wool, or perhaps a slightly less suffocating one made of coarse linen if the season is being unusually kind. You've worn this single garment every day for months, possibly for years. It has been your work attire, your sleepwear, and your formal wear for church on Sundays. There is no such thing as seasonal fashion in your world. There are no changing trends, no new colors to signal the arrival of spring. There is only one single utilitarian garment that you will wear until it either physically disintegrates off your body or gives you a fungal infection so spectacular that it achieves a life of its own. And what about underwear? That's an adorable question. For most people in your position, underwear is not an optional extra, it is a non-existent fantasy. If you are exceptionally lucky, you might own a thin linen undertunic, a single layer of separation between your skin and the abrasive horror of your outer garment. But more than likely, you are going commando under layers of perpetually damp, impossibly scratchy wool. The seams, crudely stitched together with thick thread by someone who valued function over form, rub against your skin, creating a constant low-grade friction that will, by the end of the day, chafe your armpits and thighs into a raw, angry red. Of course, there's no washing machine. There's no gentle detergent, no fabric softener, and absolutely no friendly neighborhood dry cleaner. As a result, your clothes are stained with the complete history of your recent life. They are stiff with dried sweat and dirt, and they are scented with a complex bouquet that could best be described as a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty during a heat wave. The smell is a part of you. It's the wood smoke from your fire, the animal funk from your roommates, the sour tang of unwashed humanity. You don't notice it anymore, but trust me, it's there. Even if you had the sudden, wild ambition to wash your tunic, the process is an exhausting day-long ordeal. First, you'd have to haul several heavy buckets of water from the nearest river or well. Then you'd have to use up your precious, limited supply of firewood to heat it. You'd scrub the garment on a rough wooden board, using ashes from the fire or a harsh, skin-stripping soap made from lye and animal fat. Finally, you'd have to hang it up to dry, praying for a rare combination of sun and wind in a climate that specializes in damp gloom. By the time it was dry, it would be time to wear it again. It's far easier to just let the filth accumulate. And don't even get me started on shoes. If you are fortunate enough to own a pair, they are flimsy things made from untreated leather, barely stitched together. They offer about as much arch support as a wet cabbage leaf, and are in a constant state of decay from the mud and damp. For most peasants, however, shoes are an unaffordable luxury. You go barefoot. You walk through the thick, cold mud of the village paths. You step in animal dung. You navigate a world of medieval landmines, from sharp hidden rocks to stagnant puddles teeming with disease. Every step is a gamble, a chance to get a cut that, in this world without antibiotics or antiseptics, could easily become infected and lead to your death. All of this, the single filthy outfit, the lack of washing, the constant exposure to dirt, means one thing: your skin absolutely hates you. You are a walking, talking ecosystem, a mobile home for a thriving population of parasites. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free in the seams of your clothes, in the straw of your mattress, and in your hair. And this isn't a sign of poverty or low status. It is a universal truth. Everyone has them. The nobles are lousy. The monks are lousy. The king himself is probably lousy. The exquisitely carved combs you see in museums weren't for styling. They were sophisticated delousing tools designed to drag the little critters out of noble hair. You itch constantly. It's a maddening, relentless torment that never ceases. You'll be standing in the fields trying to work and feel the telltale crawl of a louse on your scalp.
You'll be trying to sleep and feel the sharp bite of a flea on your ankle. You might find yourself having a serious conversation with the local priest, all while casually using the handle of a wooden spoon to get at a particularly aggressive itch in your armpit, and he won't even bat an eye. It is the shared, unspoken misery of medieval life. Your skin is raw from the constant rubbing of the coarse wool and your own incessant scratching. Your scalp is a battlefield of bites and sores. And if you develop a mysterious rash, well, that's just too bad. There is no dermatologist, there is no hydrocortisone cream, and there is no one to tell you that you probably have scabies. You just keep on suffering, because what other choice is there? If you are lucky enough not to develop a life-threatening infection from scratching with your dirty fingernails, that rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted, itchy medieval sidekick. So, now you're ready for your day. You are dressed in misery, wrapped in discomfort, and carrying an entire civilization of insects on your person. It's time to head outside and flash that winning morning smile. Except, you probably shouldn't, because what's happening inside your mouth is, if you can believe it, even worse.
Now that you're fully dressed in your signature scent of damp wool, wood smoke, and existential dread, it's time to head outside and flash that winning morning smile. Except, you don't. You absolutely do not. In the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game, an act of reckless overconfidence. This isn't for emotional reasons. It's not that you're unhappy, though you almost certainly are. No, this is a purely practical decision, born from the horrifying state of medieval dentistry. Let's start with the basics of your oral hygiene routine, which is to say, there isn't one. The concept of a toothbrush, a neat little brush with perfectly arranged bristles, is a fantasy from a far-flung future. There is no mint-flavored toothpaste, no antiseptic mouthwash to kill germs, and certainly no waxy floss to dislodge the debris from your latest meal. For the most part, your teeth are left entirely to their own devices, fighting a losing battle against a relentless onslaught of grit, grime, and decay. Of course, some rudimentary attempts at cleaning do exist. A common practice is to find a twig, perhaps from a hazel or willow tree, chew on one end until it frays into a soft, fibrous brush, and then scrub your teeth with it. It's better than nothing, but not by much. Others might rinse their mouth with wine or strong vinegar, believing that the acidity cuts through the filth, little realizing they are also dissolving the very enamel they're trying to preserve. Some people might take a rough linen cloth, dip it into a bit of salt or even fine ash from the fire, and rub their teeth vigorously. It's a purely abrasive method, scraping away the surface layer of gunk while also wearing down the tooth itself. For the vast majority of the population, however, the daily routine is much simpler. You do nothing at all. As a result, by the time you reach your mid-20s, your mouth is a terrifying spectacle, a haunted crypt of dental horrors. Your smile doesn't just have a few imperfections, it's a gallery of decay. The cavities aren't small spots, they are gaping, black-rimmed craters where parts of your teeth have simply rotted away. Your gums are a swollen, angry purple, and they bleed at the slightest provocation, whether from chewing your rock-hard bread or just from breathing too hard. The plaque isn't a minor film, it's a thick, calcified crust that has fused your teeth together in a yellowish-brown mass. The food stands are the least of your worries. Your mouth has more rot in it than a forgotten root cellar at the end of a long, wet winter. You might think that the wealthy nobles, with their access to better food, would be spared this fate. You would be wrong. In fact, they might be in even worse shape. Sugar, while not yet the ubiquitous ingredient it is today, is slowly making its way into the homes of the rich. Imported at an astronomical cost, it's a powerful status symbol. The ability to serve small, sweet cakes or offer candied fruits is a way to flaunt your immense wealth. And what does this newfound luxury do? It accelerates the decay at an astonishing rate. So while your peasant teeth are being slowly ground down into nubs by a diet of gritty, fibrous bread,
The noble's teeth are being actively dissolved by sugar. It's a lose-lose situation, a choice between being worn away by poverty or rotting away from privilege. This all leads to one inevitable, agonizing conclusion: the toothache. It's not an occasional nuisance. It is a chronic condition, a permanent fixture in your life. It's a dull, throbbing baseline of pain that is always with you, occasionally flaring up into a blinding, white-hot agony that makes you want to smash your head against a stone wall. This constant grinding pain affects everything. You can't eat properly. You can't sleep. Your temper is frayed, and your ability to focus on your back-breaking work is severely compromised. When the pain becomes unbearable, your options are grim. You can pray, you can drink yourself into a stupor, or you can consider pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of rusty pliers you normally use for mending fences. And that isn't a joke. That was often the most accessible form of treatment. Official dentists don't really exist yet, but their terrifying precursor does: the barber surgeon. Yes, the same man who cuts your hair and lances your boils is also in charge of your dental care. You can find him at his stall in the marketplace, his red and white striped pole signaling his trade in blood and bandages. If you need a tooth pulled, you'll sit on a stool in front of a crowd of curious onlookers while he pries your mouth open with one hand and brandishes his tools with the other. These are not delicate, precision instruments. They are menacing iron hooks, heavy pliers, and a terrifying claw-like device called a dental pelican, all designed to grip, twist, and rip the offending tooth from your jaw. There is no anesthesia. You are wide awake for the entire procedure. The barber surgeon might give you a swig of strong ale, but that's more for his nerves than for yours. You feel every bit of it: the crunch of the iron on your tooth, the searing pain as it resists, the sickening pop as the root finally gives way. If you're lucky, he gets it out on the first try. If you're not, he might break your jaw in the process. You are then sent on your way with an open, bleeding wound in your mouth, with no aftercare instructions and no painkillers. In a world without germ theory, that open wound is an engraved invitation for infection. A simple toothache can, and often does, turn into a raging fever, sepsis, and death. And even if your teeth aren't actively trying to kill you, they're contributing to the general social atmosphere. With all that decay, bad breath, halitosis, is a universal condition. It is a miasma of rot that hangs over every conversation. Kissing is an act of profound bravery. In this world, you are not judged by the quality of your smile. You are judged by the quality of your land, the health of your livestock, and your ability to perform a day's labor without collapsing. Your mouth is a battlefield, and it is losing the war. Now that your teeth are throbbing in sympathetic agony, let's head outside. Your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started.
Time to head to work. You grab your tools, step out of your hovel, and face the day. Except there is no office to commute to. There is no ergonomic desk waiting for you, no friendly chatter by the water cooler, and absolutely zero chance of a promotion. Your job, if you're like the overwhelming 90% of the population, is a simple one, with a single, brutal objective. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort and profit. Congratulations! You are a peasant. More specifically, you are likely a serf, which means you are legally bound to the land you work. You are not technically a slave, you cannot be bought and sold like property, but you are, in essence, part of the property. You cannot leave this land. You cannot marry someone from another village. You cannot even send your son to join the church without the express permission of the lord of the manor, a man who owns your labor, your time, and very likely doesn't remember your name. In return for your lifetime of servitude, the Lord offers you protection, which really just means he'll protect you from other lords who might want to invade and claim the land you're already bound to. It's less of a career and more of a hostage situation with agricultural benefits. Your workday is not measured by a clock.
It is measured by the sun. You rise with its first light, and you stop only when it finally disappears behind the distant trees, plunging the world into a darkness too deep to work in. This is your life, 6 days a week. Sunday, in theory, is a day for God and for rest. In practice, however, if it's time to plant the seeds or bring in the harvest, the Lord's and God's rules become surprisingly flexible. A day of good weather during the harvest is more valuable than a dozen prayers, because if the crop isn't brought in, the entire village will starve come winter. So you work. The work is constant, seasonal, and cyclical. There is no clocking out. There is no leaving work at the office. Your work is your life, and your life is the field. The tools of your trade are primitive, heavy, and unforgiving. You have a wooden hoe for weeding, its handle worn smooth by the calloused hands of your father before you. You have a rusty sickle for harvesting, its curved blade a constant threat to your own fingers. If your village is prosperous, you might have access to a heavy plow pulled by a team of exhausted-looking oxen. More likely, you're using a lighter, less effective plow called an ard, which you have to guide and push through the heavy, rocky soil with the full force of your own body. There are no machines, no engines, just the power of your own straining muscles fueled by yesterday's pottage. The physical toll is immense. The blisters on your hands eventually burst, bleed, and harden into thick, yellowed calluses. Your back, from a lifetime of bending over, develops a permanent, painful stoop. Your muscles ache with a weariness so profound it feels like it has settled into your bones. And this labor is not distributed equally. If you are a man, your days are filled with the heaviest tasks. You are behind the plow, you are digging and clearing drainage ditches, you are scything hay in the summer heat, your body moving in a rhythmic swing until your arms feel like lead. You are the brute force of the medieval economy. If you are a woman, you get the unique privilege of working a double shift that never ends. You are out in the field alongside the men, planting, weeding, and harvesting. But after a full day of back-breaking labor under the sun, your workday is only half over. You return to the hut to begin your second job. You must cook the evening meal, milk the family goat, feed the chickens, fetch more water from the well, sit for hours spinning raw wool into thread for the family's clothes, mend the rips in your husband's only tunic, and care for the half-dozen children who are either sick, crying, or have just fallen into the mud. You do not rest. You are the engine that keeps the miserable machine of family life running. And the children? They are not spared. Childhood as a time of play and education is a concept that does not exist here. By the age of 5 or 6, you're expected to contribute. You start with small tasks, chasing birds away from the newly planted seeds, gathering fallen branches for the fire, pulling weeds between the rows of barley. You don't go to school. You don't have toys aside from maybe a carved stick or a smooth stone. You have a tiny wooden rake and a lifelong apprenticeship in servitude. Perhaps you're one of the lucky few who isn't a farmer. Maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Congratulations! You've traded the misery of the field for a different, more specialized kind of misery. As a blacksmith, you spend your days in a dark, smoke-filled shed, breathing in coal dust and swinging a heavy hammer, the constant risk of a hot spark blinding you. As a tanner, your job is to turn raw animal hides into leather, which involves soaking them in vats of stale urine and dog feces to break down the tissue. The stench of your profession is so legendary that your workshop is legally required to be on the far outskirts of town. No matter your job, the pay is essentially the same: survival. You don't earn a wage, you're allowed to keep a small, meager portion of the crops you harvest. The vast majority goes to the Lord. From your tiny share, you must feed your entire family for a full year and save enough seed to plant for the next. This is why you cannot stop. A fever, a broken bone, a deep cut, these are not just medical problems, they are economic catastrophes. If you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, the medieval Europe has a simple solution for that. It's called being replaced. You are not indispensable. So you grip your shovel, ignore the fiery pain in your blisters and the deep ache in your lower back, and you keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career, It's a slow-motion endurance test, and the only prize for winning is getting to do it all again tomorrow.
Your back is a tapestry of fire and pain from a day spent hunched over in the fields. Your hands are raw, your stomach is rumbling with the memory of your grim breakfast, and you've managed to survive another shift in the slow-motion endurance test that is your career. Now, let's talk about something you have absolutely no control over, yet which dictates every aspect of your miserable existence: the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, the temperature isn't just a matter of seasons. It's an ongoing atmospheric punishment delivered directly from the heavens. Let's begin with winter. Forget the romantic images of snow-covered castles and cozy, crackling fires. For you, winter is a siege. There is no insulation in the walls of your hut. There is no central heating, no weather stripping, no double-glazed windows. In fact, you don't have windows at all, just openings in the wattle and daub walls that are stuffed with rags or covered with a thin, greased cloth. This does very little to stop the wind, which doesn't just whistle outside your home, it flows through it, a constant, bone-chilling draft that carries the scent of ice and damp earth. You can see your own breath fogging the air inside your house. The dirt floor freezes solid, and any moisture that seeps up from the ground turns into a treacherous patch of ice. You might think the solution is a bigger fire in the central hearth, a nice roaring blaze to keep the family warm. That would be a lovely idea, if not for two crushing realities. First, your hovel has no chimney. There's just a small hole in the thatched roof to let some of the smoke out. A large fire would quickly fill your single-room home with a thick, choking cloud of smoke, making it impossible to breathe. Second, and more importantly, you don't have enough wood fire. Wood is not a free resource. The forests surrounding your village belong to the Lord. You are not permitted to simply walk in and gather firewood as you please. This is a crime known as poaching. Taking a fallen log or even breaking a branch off a tree could result in a heavy fine, a public flogging, or, if the Lord is in a particularly bad mood, even the loss of a hand. So the fire you maintain is small and pathetic, a carefully rationed collection of embers that provides a tiny, precious bubble of warmth in an ocean of freezing cold. You and your family spend the winter huddled as close to it as possible, wrapped in your single, perpetually damp wool tunic, and you are still cold. Your feet, wrapped in more rags or thin, worn-out leather, are permanently numb. Your fingers become so stiff and clumsy that simple tasks like mending a tool or spinning thread become agonizingly difficult. Frostbite isn't a dramatic medical emergency. It's a slow, creeping reality. You might not even notice it until one of your toes turns black and loses all feeling. Sleep offers no respite. It's a desperate struggle to conserve body heat with the entire family and the animals piled together under a shared blanket, a heap of shivering bodies trying to survive until morning. But surely summer is better, right? A time of warmth and sunshine? Wrong. In the summer, your home, the very same structure that was a frozen tomb just a few months ago, transforms into a suffocating clay oven. The low, thatched roof and windowless walls that were so good at trapping the cold are equally effective at trapping the heat. There is no fan, no air conditioning, no refreshing cross breeze. The air inside becomes hot, stagnant, and thick with the intensified smells of unwashed bodies, fermenting food scraps, and livestock. You sweat through your woolen layers, but you can't exactly strip down. Showing too much skin is not only scandalous and an invitation for a lecture from the village priest, but it also leaves you exposed to the sun's brutal rays and the season's other great plague, insects. Summer is the season of the fly. They arrive in swarms, attracted by the open sewer in the street, the dung in your home, and the sweat on your skin. They are a constant, buzzing torment, landing on your face while you eat, crawling on your skin while you try to sleep. Mosquitoes, breeding in every barrel of stagnant rainwater, fill the evenings with their high-pitched whine, bringing with them the threat of marsh fever and other mysterious illnesses. And the worst part? You still have to work. The heat doesn't earn you a day off.
You're out in the fields from sunup to sundown, laboring under a baking sun that feels like a malevolent eye in the sky. There is no sunblock. Your only hat is one you might fashion yourself out of straw, making you look like a desperate, sweating scarecrow. Your skin burns, blisters, peels, and over the years becomes as tough and leathery as an old boot. Friends is not a diagnosed condition. It's just called taking a bad turn, and the only cure is to be dragged into the shade and hope you wake up. Dehydration is your constant companion, a nagging thirst that you can't easily quench. So you exist in a perpetual climatic misery. You're either shivering uncontrollably in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will survive to see the spring, or you're drenched in your own sweat, your thighs chafed raw while being eaten alive by flies. And the one thing that never changes no matter the season? Your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and the back-breaking work is always waiting for you. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Your only choice is the flavor of your suffering.
Feeling thirsty? After a long morning of back-breaking labor in the sun, your throat is dry, your body aches for hydration. You need to freshen up. Just splash a little cool water on your face to wash away the grime and wake up from this damp fever dream of a life. Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It isn't the clean, life-giving source of refreshment you know it to be. More often than not, it's trying to murder you, quietly. Let's start with the simple act of drinking. The nearby stream looks picturesque. It bubbles and gurgles over smooth stones, clear and inviting, like something out of a fantasy movie where an elf might offer you a cup of enchanted spring water. But this isn't a fantasy movie. Spoiler alert, that water is a death trap. Just a few hundred yards upstream, your neighbor Agnes has just dumped her family's chamber pot into it. And upstream from her village, the local tanner has rinsed his animal hides, releasing a cocktail of dung and chemicals into the current. And a little further up from that, a dead sheep is probably bloating and slowly decomposing in a quiet eddy. That clear, sparkling water is teeming with a microscopic army of horrors. It is a vibrant soup of bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella, parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, and viruses that can turn your insides into a churning cauldron of misery. One wrong gulp, one moment of desperate thirst, and you could be spending your final days sweating and writhing in your straw bed, clutching your stomach as dysentery drains the very life from your body. In an age without IV drips or antibiotics, simple dehydration from diarrhea is one of the most common ways to die. This is precisely why people drink beer. Yes, beer. For breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, even the children. But before you start imagining medieval toddlers doing keg stands, you need to understand that this was almost always small beer. It was a weak, watery brew with an alcohol content so low, maybe 1 or 2%, that it was more hydrating than intoxicating. Its life-saving quality came from the brewing process itself. In order to make beer, you have to boil the water, and this simple act of heating killed off the vast majority of the dangerous microbes. This made beer, ironically, the safest and healthiest beverage available. It was a public health measure in liquid form. If you were wealthy, you might drink wine, another beverage made safer by fermentation. But for the common person, weak ale was the Gatorade of the Middle Ages. So what about using water on the outside of your body? Surely it was used for cleaning, for bathing. In theory, yes. In practice, almost never. And the reason for this is one of the most tragic ironies of medieval life. People believed that bathing was dangerous. It was considered medically risky. The prevailing medical theory, based on the ancient Greek idea of the four humors, taught that the human body was covered in a thin, protective layer of its own natural grime. This filth, they believed, sealed the pores of the skin. Taking a bath, especially a hot one, was thought to open up these pores, leaving the body vulnerable to disease. They believed that sickness was caused by miasma, or bad air, and that an open pore was like an open door, inviting the pestilence right in. So the very thing that could have washed away bacteria and prevented infections was seen as the primary cause of illness.
You were considered healthier if you never removed your protective shield of filth. Communal bathhouses did exist, a holdover from the days of the Roman Empire, especially in larger towns. But over time, they developed a reputation. They were known as places for idle gossip, political scheming, and very often prostitution. This scandalous reputation didn't sit well with the increasingly powerful church, which saw them as dens of sin and moral corruption. Citing concerns over both immorality and the spread of disease, a fear that exploded after the Black Death, the church pushed for many of them to be shut down, and the culture of public bathing slowly faded away. Even if you were a rebel, determined to get clean in the privacy of your own home, the logistics were a nightmare. The process was a full day's production. First, you and your family would have to haul dozens of heavy, sloshing wooden buckets of water from the nearest well or river. Then you'd have to sacrifice an enormous amount of your carefully rationed firewood to heat the water over the fire. You'd pour it into a large wooden tub, which was probably leaking, and place it in the middle of your crowded one-room hut. There, with your entire family watching, you'd take your bath. And when you were done, what would you do with a tub full of gallons of gray, dirty water? You'd heave it out the door and dump it into the street, of course. So whether it was going in your mouth or on your body, water in the Middle Ages was less of a life source and more of a constant lurking hazard. It was something to be boiled, fermented, or avoided altogether. The next time you turn on a tap and fill a glass of clean, clear, safe drinking water, take a moment. Raise that glass for your ancestors. They never knew the simple luxury of hydration without hazard.
So, you did it. You took a gamble. Maybe you were just too thirsty and you drank from the stream. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just got a small cut on your hand while working in the fields, and now it's hot, swollen, and leaking a suspicious-looking fluid. Either way, the inevitable has happened. You're sick. A raging fever is building behind your eyes, your stomach is churning, and a deep, rattling cough has taken root in your chest. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is a terrifying blend of outdated philosophy, enthusiastic guesswork, and polite torture, often administered by a man who cuts hair for a living. Let's start with your diagnosis. When you summon the local barber surgeon, or if you're incredibly fortunate, a university-trained physician, he won't be taking your temperature or asking about your symptoms to identify a specific pathogen. Instead, he will solemnly inform you that your ailment is caused by your humors being out of balance. This is the cornerstone of all medieval medical thought. The theory holds that the human body contains 4 essential fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor is associated with one of the 4 elements: air, water, fire, and earth, and one of the 4 seasons. A healthy person is one in whom these 4 fluids are in perfect, harmonious balance, like a well-made, if somewhat disgusting, internal soup. Every illness, from a common cold to the creeping plague, is seen as a disruption of this delicate balance. So, let's look at your condition. You have a fever. Your skin is hot to the touch. Your face is flushed red. To the medieval physician, the conclusion is obvious. You are clearly suffering from an excess of blood, the humor that is hot and moist. The prescription, therefore, is not to fight the infection that is actually causing your fever, but to get rid of the extra blood that is supposedly throwing your system out of whack. And how do they do that? Welcome to the wonderful world of bloodletting. This is the go-to cure for practically everything, and it is every bit as horrifying as it sounds. The most common method is venefuction, where the barber surgeon takes out a small, sharp knife called a lancet, which most likely has not been cleaned since it was last used on your neighbor's infected boil, and makes an incision in a vein, usually on the inside of your arm. He will then watch as your vital life force drains out of your body and into a small bowl, nodding thoughtfully as if he's observing a complex chemical reaction.
He judges how much blood to take based on your age, the season, the position of the stars, and, most importantly, how close you are to fainting. Another popular method is the application of leeches. Yes, leeches. These slimy, blood-sucking invertebrates are considered valuable medical tools. Several of them will be placed on your skin, where they will latch on and begin to drink their fill. Their saliva contains a natural anticoagulant, which means the bite will continue to bleed freely even after the leech has been removed. The theory is that the leeches are literally sucking the sickness out of you. In reality, you are being weakened, dehydrated, and drained of the very resources your body needs to fight whatever infection is actually killing you. But what if you're not feverish? What if you're feeling sad, anxious, or what we would today call depressed? Well, that's clearly an excess of black bile, the humor associated with melancholy. The cure for this is just as unpleasant: a purge. You will be given powerful herbal laxatives and emetics, potions designed to make you vomit and empty your bowels with violent, explosive force. The goal is to physically expel the bad humor from your body, leaving you feeling weak, empty, and probably just as sad as when you started, only now with the added misery of severe stomach cramps. And if you have a physical injury, like a broken bone or a nasty wound from a farming accident, you're in a whole new world of trouble. There is no anesthesia unless you count getting blind drunk on ale or simply passing out from the sheer, unadulterated pain. Surgery is performed with knives and saws that haven't been sterilized since the First Crusade. In fact, the very concept of germs doesn't even exist yet. They believe disease is caused by miasma, bad smells, or corrupt air, or, more often, that it's a direct punishment from God for your moral failings. Got a stomachache? Must have been those sinful thoughts you had last Tuesday. Hope you like confessing to the priest while you vomit. If your wound becomes infected, they might try to seal it shut by cauterizing it with a red-hot iron poker from the fire. The smell of your own burning flesh is considered part of the healing process. And antibiotics? Well, those are centuries away. So if your condition worsens despite the bleeding, purging, and praying, the physician and the priest at your bedside will likely come to the same conclusion. They are preparing for the final, ultimate cure, the one known simply as death. If, by some incredible miracle, your own immune system manages to fight off both the disease and the treatment, everyone will just assume that God took pity on you. The doctor, of course, will take full credit, and the leech gets a promotion. So, yes, in the Middle Ages, getting sick is terrifying. But the real terror lies in the fact that medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure.
After a seemingly endless day of backbreaking labor, rampant lice, and questionable medical advice from a man who smells faintly of other people's blood, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your dark, smoky hovel, your stomach rumbling with a hunger so deep it feels like a physical presence. You are ready for the one simple joy left in your life: a warm evening meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you, too. Let's begin with the most fundamental problem of medieval cuisine: food preservation. In a world without refrigerators, freezers, or vacuum-sealed packaging, keeping food from spoiling is a constant, desperate battle against nature. The only weapons in your arsenal are salt, smoke, and the faint hope that the cold winter air will keep things fresh for a little while longer. Your meat, if you're one of the incredibly lucky few to have any, has likely been hanging in a smokehouse or packed in a barrel of salt for months. This process makes it tough, leathery, and so intensely salty that it has to be soaked in water for hours just to become vaguely chewable. Smoked fish is dry and brittle, and everything carries the same monotonous, overpowering flavor of wood smoke. These methods don't guarantee safety, they just slow down the inevitable decay. Bread, the absolute cornerstone of your diet, isn't safe either. In years with bad harvests, when the grain runs low, you or the village baker might be forced to bulk up the bread with whatever is available.
This can be as harmless as ground peas or as desperate as dried bark, sawdust, or even a bit of clay to make the loaf feel heavier. But if it's been a particularly damp growing season for the rye crop, your daily bread could come with a horrifying bonus prize: ergot. Ergot is a dark, purplish fungus that grows on rye and other grains, and it is lethally toxic. When ground into flour and baked into bread, it causes a condition known as ergotism, or, as it was more terrifyingly called, St. Anthony's fire. This disease came in two horrific varieties. The first was convulsive ergotism, which caused violent muscle spasms, writhing fits, and vivid, terrifying hallucinations. Entire villages were sometimes afflicted, leading to historical accounts of dancing plagues, where people appeared to dance manically in the streets until they collapsed from exhaustion, a phenomenon many historians now attribute to mass fungal poisoning. The second form was gangrenous ergotism. This began with an intense, searing pain in your limbs, a feeling of being consumed by an internal fire. This was followed by gangrene. Your fingers, toes, hands, and feet would become numb, turn black and mummified, and eventually, without any sense of pain, simply fall off. Every time you bit into your coarse, dark rye bread, you were rolling the dice, gambling that your meal wasn't laced with a psychedelic poison that could also make your limbs drop off. And what about your vegetables? Well, I hope you like turnips. You'll be eating a lot of them. The medieval vegetable patch is a monotonous affair, filled only with the hardiest of root vegetables and leafy greens: turnips, parsnips, leeks, onions, and cabbage. That's pretty much it. The staples of modern cuisine, like potatoes, tomatoes, corn, and bell peppers, are all from the Americas and won't arrive in Europe for another couple of centuries. The vegetables you do have are almost never eaten fresh and crisp. They are boiled into a soft, flavorless mush and thrown into the perpetual pottage pot, which, as you might remember from breakfast, is the simmering, swamp-like stew that's been bubbling away since your great-grandfather's funeral. Dairy is another high-stakes gamble. Fresh milk, without pasteurization or refrigeration, goes sour in a matter of hours. The only way to preserve it is to turn it into butter or cheese. But these are made in non-sterile environments, using rudimentary techniques. The cheese you eat is often sharp, pungent, and loaded with a universe of bacteria, some of which are harmless, some of which could lead to a week of violent food poisoning. You eat it anyway, because calories are calories, and it's either that or try chewing on your leather boot for sustenance. But the danger of food isn't just biological. It's also political. See those deer and wild boar in the forest? See the rabbits hopping through the fields? They are not yours. They belong, by law, to the lord of the manor. The act of hunting or trapping any of these animals is called poaching, and it is one of the most severely punished crimes in the medieval world. If you, a desperate father, are caught trying to snare a single rabbit to feed your starving family, you could be fined an amount you could never hope to pay, you could be publicly flogged, you could have a hand chopped off, or you could even be hanged. That's right. In this world, your dinner could literally get you executed. So, as you sit down in the flickering firelight of your hut, dipping your potentially poisonous bread into your gray, bland, and possibly spoiled stew, you say a quick prayer. But you're not just praying for your soul. You're praying that the meal you're about to eat doesn't contain the seeds of your own agonizing death. You eat because you must to survive the night. Because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish you. It tests you.
It's evening now. The sun has finally set on another grueling day. You've worked until your muscles screamed, suffered the constant torment of your own itchy skin, and somehow managed to digest a suspicious stew that may or may not have been actively plotting against you. You might think the day is finally winding down, that you can crawl onto your straw pile and slip into the sweet oblivion of sleep. But don't get too relaxed. The work may be over, but the surveillance is not. Because God is watching. So is the local priest. And so is your neighbor, Agnes, a woman whose piety is matched only by her enthusiasm for gossip, and who will absolutely report you to the priest if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just a part of your life, it is your life. The church is not a place you visit on Sundays, it is an all-encompassing, omnipresent institution that serves as the very operating system for society.
It controls the calendar you follow, the laws you obey, the education you will never receive, and every single significant moment of your existence, from your baptism into the world to the rites performed over your grave. Think of the church as your spiritual landlord. You live on its property, you abide by its rules, and you are always behind on your rent. Your entire day is structured around the tolling of the church bells. They ring in the morning to wake you, at noon to mark the midday prayer, and in the evening for vespers. These bells are not gentle reminders. They are a public summons, a sonic leash that ties every member of the community to the rhythms of worship. When the bell for prayer rings, you are expected to stop what you're doing, even for a moment, and acknowledge it. Forgetting to bow your head or choosing to finish scything your row of hay instead would be noticed. It would be marked as a sign of impiety, a crack in your spiritual foundation. And you must be pious, because the alternative is a fear so profound it shapes your every thought and action, the fear of hell. This isn't some abstract theological concept. It is taught as a literal, physical place, and the priests describe it in gloriously terrifying detail. In the weekly sermon, you hear of rivers of fire, of lakes of boiling blood and sulfur, of demons with razor-sharp pitchforks, and an eternity to practice their craft. You hear of specific imaginative tortures reserved for every kind of sin. This eternal damnation is presented as the default destination for the human soul. And only through constant vigilance and unwavering obedience to the church can you hope to avoid it. The problem is, sin is everywhere. It's a minefield of spiritual tripwires. Eating meat on a Friday? That's a sin. Having a fleeting, impure thought about your neighbor's wife? A grave sin. Feeling a pang of envy for your other neighbor's slightly less sickly-looking goat? Sin. Missing church because you have a fever? That's probably a sin too, and the fever is likely your punishment for a different sin you already forgot you committed. You can't even seek guidance from the Bible yourself. The Holy Scripture is written in Latin, a sacred and mysterious language reserved for the clergy and the highly educated nobility. You are illiterate. The words of God are locked away from you, accessible only through the filter of your local priest. His interpretation is your reality. If he tells you that the recent drought is because the village failed to pray hard enough, then you will spend the next week on your knees. His personal moods and biases effectively become divine will. This spiritual authority comes with a mandatory financial obligation, the tithe. You are required by God's law to give 1/10 of everything you produce directly to the church. For every 10 sheaves of wheat you harvest, 1 belongs to the priest. For every 10 eggs your chickens lay, 1 goes into the church basket. For a family already living on the razor's edge of starvation, this 10% tax is a crushing economic burden. But you pay it without question, because failing to do so is not just tax evasion, it is theft from God himself, a sin that could cost you your immortal soul. Even your days off are not your own. The holidays that dot the calendar are not vacations, they're holy days, and they're mandatory. You may get a break from labor in the fields, but it's only so you can spend the entire day attending a long mass in a language you don't understand, fasting until you feel faint, and participating in solemn processions around the village. In this world of absolute spiritual authority, questioning the church is the most dangerous thing you can do. A person who challenges a priest's interpretation or expresses a belief that deviates from official doctrine is a heretic. And the church has a range of punishments for heretics, from public shaming and flogging to excommunication, which effectively cuts you off from society and guarantees your damnation. For the most serious offenses, the church hands you over to the secular authorities to be burned alive at the stake, a public spectacle meant to purify your soul and serve as a terrifying warning to others. So you go through the motions. You kneel when you're told to kneel, you chant the Latin phrases you don't understand, you confess your sins, pay your tithe, and pray that your soul, after enduring the short, dirt-covered, miserable life, might finally find its way to paradise. And you pray that the priest likes you, because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church, his powerful representative on earth, is not always so forgiving.
If you thought being a medieval peasant was an exercise in relentless misery, let's add another layer of difficulty. For this chapter, let's imagine you are navigating all the filth, famine, and fear we've discussed, but as a woman. This isn't just a change in perspective. It's like switching the game from hard to nightmare mode. You get all the same back-breaking labor and existential dread, but with the added bonuses of systemic subjugation, institutionalized invisibility, and the constant mortal peril of childbirth. From the moment of your birth, your life path is essentially set in stone, a short, brutal road paved with duty and suffering. It can be summarized in a simple, grim mantra: marry young, bear children, serve your husband, and die tired. Your value to your family and community is not measured by your intelligence, your wit, or your strength of character, but by your ability to forge a useful alliance through marriage and your capacity to produce healthy male heirs. Education, as you would understand it, is completely out of the question. Unless you are the daughter of a high-ranking noble family destined for the cloistered life of a convent, your intellectual development is actively discouraged. Knowledge in a woman is often seen as unnecessary at best and dangerous at worst. Your education consists of learning how to perform the endless tasks that will define your existence. How to churn butter, how to spin wool into thread, how to mend a tunic, how to brew ale, and how to tell if the pottage is merely bland or actively poisonous. Marriage is not an act of love. It is a business transaction, and you are the primary asset being traded. It happens early, terrifyingly early by modern standards. It would not be considered strange for you to be betrothed at the age of 12 and married by 14 or 15. This isn't seen as cruel, it's practical. An early marriage ensures your virginity, which guarantees that any children you bear are your husband's legitimate heirs. In a world where lineage determines everything from land ownership to social standing, this is paramount. Your opinion on the matter is never sought. Your father or another male guardian will make the arrangement based on what is most advantageous for the family. A bit more land, an extra cow, or a stronger connection to a more influential family in the village. Once you are married, your legal identity effectively vanishes. Under the prevailing law, you are now your husband's property. He controls any land or dowry you brought into the marriage. He is legally entitled to your labor and, of course, your body. While the church officially discouraged overt cruelty, a husband was legally permitted and often expected to discipline his wife physically if she was deemed disobedient or neglectful of her duties. And now comes the single most dangerous task of your life: childbirth. In an age with no prenatal care, no understanding of germ theory, and no anesthesia, giving birth is a death lottery. You will likely work in the fields right up until the pains begin. The village midwife, an older woman with a wealth of traditional knowledge but no medical training, will do her best to help. But her hands are unwashed, her tools are non-existent, and she has no way to deal with any serious complications. A baby in the breech position, a postpartum hemorrhage, or a subsequent infection, all common occurrences, are almost certain death sentences for the mother, the child, or very often both. Many women do not survive their first or second pregnancy. If you manage to survive 10, you are a living miracle. But don't worry, if you do survive, your reward is an immediate and exponential increase in your workload. You now have a screaming, helpless infant in a flea-ridden hut that you are expected to nurse, clean, and keep alive while continuing to perform your other duties. You still have to cook for the family, tend the animals, help in the fields, and maintain the household. You don't get a break. You don't get maternity leave. You are the pillar that holds up everyone else's world, and you're expected to do it without complaint. In this world, your social standing is precarious. If you remain unmarried, you are an anomaly, a figure of suspicion. Without a father or husband to control you, you are seen as a masterless woman, which makes you vulnerable. If you are widowed, you might gain a small degree of autonomy, but you are also a target.
And if you are outspoken, intelligent, and refuse to be subservient, you are dangerous. A woman with a sharp tongue is a scold. A woman with a strong personality is a nag. And a woman with knowledge, especially of herbal remedies, could easily find herself accused of a far more serious crime: witchcraft. That label, once applied, is nearly impossible to remove, and often comes with a complimentary trial by order, followed by a drowning or a burning at the stake, depending on the local fashion for dispatching inconvenient women. In short, as a woman in the Middle Ages, you are expected to endure everything the men do, and more. You're expected to be silent, obedient, and productive. You are the backbone of the family and the vessel for the next generation. Yet you are afforded none of the power and recognition. You're expected to suffer, not just stoically, but gracefully. Because even in an era of universal hardship, women were somehow expected to make misery look effortless.
So far, you've battled filth that has its own ecosystem, starvation that passes for a daily diet, social injustice that is woven into the fabric of your life, and possibly an angry goat who shares your living quarters. But just when you think your day can't possibly get any worse, just when you believe you've experienced the full spectrum of medieval misery, here comes the final, ever-present ingredient of your world: violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely sanctioned by the standards of the time. Let's be crystal clear. The Middle Ages were not a peaceful era. The romanticized idea of law and order, of chivalry and justice, was mostly a fantasy for poets. For the common person, law and order largely meant hoping that the local lord wasn't in a bad mood today. Violence is everywhere. It's in your home, it's in the streets, it's on the battlefield simmering just over the next hill. It's even lurking in the disputes between clergymen at the local church. Crime is commonplace, punishment is an exercise in brutal creativity, and justice is often more about terrifying performance art than it is about actual protection. Let's say you steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving children. In this world, that isn't just a petty crime. It's a direct challenge to the social hierarchy. The punishment will be swift, public, and designed to be a gruesome lesson for everyone else. You could be flogged in the public square until your back is a bloody mess. You could be branded on the face with a hot iron. Or you could simply have your hand chopped off. If you're accused of lying or perjury, your tongue might be pierced with a hot needle. And if you're a woman accused of gossiping too much or nagging your husband, you might be sentenced to wear the scold's bridle, a heavy iron mask that locks around your head with a metal plate or spike that is forced into your mouth, making it impossible to speak. This isn't just punishment, it's public humiliation as a tool of social control. Now let's say you're accused of something far more serious. Heresy, perhaps, or theft from the church, or witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence in a system with no forensic evidence and no concept of innocent until proven guilty? Simple. You will be subjected to a trial by ordeal, a process where God Himself is expected to intervene and perform a miracle to save you. One popular version is the ordeal by fire. You are forced to pick up a piece of red-hot iron and carry it for a set number of paces. Afterward, your burned hand is bandaged and sealed with wax by the local priest. You then wait for 3 days. At the end of the 3rd day, the priest unseals the bandage. If the wound is healing cleanly, without any sign of infection, it is considered a miracle from God, and you are declared innocent. If, however, the wound is festering, weeping, and infected, which, given the complete lack of hygiene, it almost certainly will be, you are declared guilty and sentenced to death. Another favorite is the ordeal by water. You are bound hand and foot and thrown into a river or pond that has been blessed by the priest. The logic is simple. Since holy water is pure, it will reject anything wicked. Therefore, if you float, you are clearly guilty, and you'll be pulled from the water and immediately executed. If you sink to the bottom and drown, you are declared innocent. Your name is cleared, though you are, of course, still dead. It is a terrifying, no-win game show
where the prize for winning is often indistinguishable from the punishment for losing, and the host is actively rooting against you. And if you are sentenced to death, that itself is a major public event. Executions are not carried out behind closed doors. They are performed in the town square in front of huge cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, and burnings at the stake are a form of grim, state-sanctioned entertainment. People bring their children. Vendors sell snacks. It is the medieval equivalent of going to the movies, only the feature presentation is the slow, agonizing death of a fellow human being. This spectacular violence is mirrored by the casual brutality of everyday life. Domestic violence is not just common, it is legally and socially acceptable. A husband is permitted, and in some cases even encouraged, to discipline his wife and children with physical force. Street fights are a regular occurrence, breaking out over tavern debts, insults, or simply because someone looked at a nobleman's horse the wrong way. There is no police force to call. Justice is often swift, personal, and wielded by whoever has the bigger club. And layered over all of this is the constant, simmering threat of war. It isn't just the grand crusades to the Holy Land. It's the endless petty feuds between local lords over a patch of land, a disputed inheritance, or a matter of wounded pride. At any moment, your village could be raided and burned to the ground by a neighboring baron. As a peasant, you could be conscripted at a moment's notice, handed a rusty spear and forced to march off and die in a conflict you have no stake in and don't understand. Violence is not a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is the society. It is the primary language of power, the chief tool of justice, and the most popular form of public spectacle. So, as you walk through the muddy streets, you learn to keep your eyes down, to speak deferentially, and to never, ever trust anyone holding a grudge. You live with the constant, gnawing knowledge that your life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might just bash your head in over a stolen pig.
At this point, you've somehow managed to make it through the lice-infested nights and the leech-filled sick days. You've navigated the laundryless misery of your single, filthy tunic, and you've managed to avoid the looming threat of a public disembowelment for accidentally looking at a nobleman's horse. But now, after all that suffering, we arrive at the final chapter of most medieval lives, a conclusion that is not gentle, dignified, or peaceful. It is an early, unglamorous, and often brutally abrupt death. If you are alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you are a statistical anomaly. You are a local celebrity. The other villagers might refer to you in hushed, respectful tones as the Old One, a nickname that is less about your wisdom and more about the sheer dumb luck required to have survived this long. You are a living testament to a resilience that borders on the miraculous. To understand why, let's break down the grim arithmetic of medieval life. The average life expectancy during this period hovers somewhere between 30 and 40 years, but that number is deeply misleading. It isn't that most people drop dead on their 35th birthday. That average is dragged down by the absolutely staggering rate of infant and child mortality. In the 14th century, it's estimated that nearly half of all children died before reaching the age of 5. There are no vaccines to prevent measles or mumps. There are no antibiotics to treat a simple ear infection or a case of strep throat. There is no understanding of basic sanitation. A bout of diarrhea from contaminated water, a respiratory infection that settles in the chest, a season of poor nutrition, or just one particularly harsh winter, that was all it took. The world is full of tiny, unmarked graves, and every family has been touched by this constant, pervasive grief. If you are one of the lucky ones who survives the gauntlet of childhood, you don't enter adulthood fresh-faced and full of promise. You are already exhausted. Your life of hard labor began as soon as you could walk, and by the time you're 25, your body already feels ancient. Your joints creak and ache like the doors of the village church. You are likely missing several teeth, lost to decay, or yanked out by the barber surgeon. You might be missing a finger from a farming accident, or have a poorly healed bone that gives you a permanent limp. Any youthful optimism you once had has long been ground down into a grim, weary resignation. For those who make it to adulthood, the dangers simply change their shape. For a woman, the most perilous trial remains childbirth. It is one of the leading causes of death. With no access to proper medical intervention, no pain relief beyond a prayer and maybe a swig of ale, and no sterile environment, the birthing bed is a battlefield. A woman could survive the labor only to die days later from a subsequent infection or bleed to death from a postpartum hemorrhage. Each pregnancy is a roll of the dice with her own life. For a man, the dangers are different, but no less relentless. Your daily work in the fields is fraught with peril. A slip of an axe, a kick from an ox, or a fall from a rickety ladder could result in a fatal injury. As we've learned, even a minor wound, like a splinter or a deep cut, could fester and lead to a slow, agonizing death from infection. And then there is the casual violence of the era. You could be killed in a drunken tavern brawl over a perceived insult, conscripted to fight and die in one of your lord's pointless feudal wars, or simply meet a bored bandit on a lonely road. Beyond these individual dangers were the great, indiscriminate reapers that could sweep through and decimate entire communities. Famine was a constant looming threat. One season of too much rain could cause the crops to rot in the fields. One season of drought could cause them to wither on the stalk. When the harvest failed, the hungry gap of late winter and early spring became a time of slow, agonizing starvation. Entire villages would be thinned out, the living too weak to even bury the dead. And then, of course, there was the plague. The Black Death, which would arrive in Europe just a couple of decades after our chosen year of 1325, was the most efficient killer of all. It was a mysterious, terrifying disease that could turn a bustling town into a silent cemetery in a matter of weeks, leaving behind only overflowing plague pits and the terrified survivors who wondered when it would be their turn. When death finally does come for you, your send-off is as unceremonious as your life. There is no embalming. There are no polished coffins, which are a luxury reserved for the very wealthy. Your body is simply wrapped in a plain linen shroud. The burial happens quickly, often within 24 hours, to prevent the spread of any lingering disease. You are carried to the local churchyard and lowered into a shallow, anonymous hole in the ground. The priest might murmur a few prayers over you if your family has paid their dues. Your grave will likely be unmarked. Over time, as the churchyard fills up, new graves will be dug on top of old ones, and any physical trace of your existence will be erased from the earth. In medieval times, death is not a distant eventuality you ponder in your old age. It is your constant, shadowing companion. It is in the water you drink, the food you eat, the air you breathe. You didn't retire from life, you just stopped showing up one day. And now, having lived and died in this brutal world, let's step back and take one final look at the life you've left behind.
So, how was your day? You've woken up in a pile of bug-infested straw, relieved yourself into a communal bucket that was then emptied into the street, and brushed your teeth with nothing but wishful thinking. You've swallowed a breakfast of gray, gritty sludge, worked in a field until your spine felt like it was about to snap, and scratched at the thriving ecosystem of lice living in your single, unwashed tunic. You've bowed your head in fear to a God you can't understand and a Lord you'll never meet. You've navigated a world where justice is a blood sport, and your neighbor might kill you over a chicken. And you've done it all with the quiet, gnawing awareness that you will likely die from a minor infection or a bad harvest long before you ever see your 40th birthday. Welcome to a single ordinary day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight in shining armor? Still fantasizing about the romance of the Middle Ages? That version of history, the one filled with gallant swordsmen on white horses, noble ladies in high towers, heroic quests and grand feasts and candlelit great halls, is a myth. It's a beautiful, glittering lie, polished over centuries by fairy tales, fantasy novels, and Hollywood movies.
It's a story we tell ourselves because the truth is too uncomfortable, too dirty, and too profoundly unfair to contemplate. The reality of the medieval world was gritty and cruel. The hierarchy was absolute and inescapable. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. The idea that you could change your station in life through hard work and determination was a concept that simply did not exist. Your life was not your own to shape. It was a role you were assigned at birth, and your job was only to play it until you died. And even if you were born into the nobility, your life was far from a fairy tale. That handsome knight, he was a member of a violent warrior class whose primary function was to maintain this brutal system of oppression through force. His chivalry was often a code of conduct that applied only to his fellow nobles. It certainly didn't extend to the peasants he viewed as little more than livestock. That noble lady in the tower, she wasn't waiting for a handsome prince to rescue her. She was a political prisoner in a gilded cage, waiting to be married off to a man she'd never met in order to secure a strategic alliance for her father. And the castle itself wasn't a palace, it was a fortress. It was a cold, dark, drafty stone refrigerator filled with the same smoke, fleas, and sanitation problems as your hovel, just on a much grander scale. Sure, as a noble, you had a fur cloak to keep you warm and a goblet of wine instead of weak ale, but you were still just one bad bowl of soup away from dying of dysentery. You were one misplaced political allegiance away from being declared a traitor and losing your head. The luxury was a thin veneer over the same precarious existence that everyone else endured. The so-called simpler times were not simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer. Everything was harder. Everything from childbirth to chewing your food came with the risk of dire consequences. Life was not about leisure or self-fulfillment. It was about survival. In a world with no modern medicine, no social safety net, and no upward mobility, your existence was a tightrope walk over a pit of death, and the rope was constantly being shaken. If you did manage to find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine that life could be something better, there was very little you could do with that thought. The world was designed to keep you exactly where you were. But here is the most extraordinary, the most incredible part of this entire story. Through all of this unimaginable hardship, through the filth, the famine, the fear, and the futility, people still found ways to live. They laughed, they sang songs, they gathered around the fire on those long frozen winter nights and told stories. They fell in love, got married, and held their newborn babies with a hope that defied all logic. They found meaning, not because life was easy, but because human beings are stubborn like that. We are wired to seek out the light even in the most profound and suffocating darkness. They found community in their shared suffering, and they found joy in the smallest of victories. A harvest that was slightly better than the last. A child who survived a fever. A sunny day after a week of rain. And so tonight, when you climb into your clean, soft bed in a home with central heating and solid walls, take a moment. When you turn on a tap and watch clean, safe, drinkable water pour out, think about it. When you open a refrigerator filled with more food than a medieval peasant would see in a year, or when you take an antibiotic for an infection that would have killed your ancestors, pause. Say a quiet thank you to the modern world with all its flaws and complexities. And say a quiet thank you to those who came before us, those anonymous, forgotten people who fought off rats and famine and feudalism, who endured a world of unimaginable cruelty so that centuries later we wouldn't have to. They survived the darkness so that we could have the luxury of complaining about the light.
Thank you for listening, goodbye, and have a sweet dream.